Parents across the country are fighting back against critical race theory.
Critical race theory.
Critical race theory.
Critical race theory.
What was widely accepted for decades has now become a contentious political talking point. Much of the recent conversation about this, however, started during the Trump administration.
Critical race theory, the 1619 Project, and the crusade against American history is toxic propaganda.
In 2019, the New York Times published the 1619 Project, a special issue focused on the telling of U.S. history around the effects of slavery and contributions of Black individuals. It was conceived of by Nicole Hannah-Jones.
We don't teach the history of slavery in our schools. We cannot confront this, and so it's hard to understand where we are today when we don't understand the past.
After the start of the COVID pandemic and murder of George Floyd, equity was finally being seen as a priority. The 1619 Project was awarded the 2020 Pulitzer Prize for commentary. It helped inspire corporations across the nation develop policies focused on inclusion and racial sensitivity. But reactions to this racial reckoning were divided. President Donald Trump instructed federal agencies to end racial sensitivity training, calling out specifically critical race theory.
I ended it because it's racist. We have to go back to the core values of this country. They were teaching people that our country is a horrible place, it's a racist place, and they were teaching people to hate our country.
These are my babies, not yours. If you are embarrassed or ashamed of your skin color, that's your issue, not mine nor my children.
How should the Department of Defense think about critical race theory?
We do not teach critical race theory. We don't embrace critical race theory, and I think that's a spurious conversation.
Critical race theory is not taught in elementary school. It is barely taught in law schools, frankly, in the level that it should be taught.
I mean, look, if some woke CEO, forces foolish training on their employees, maybe their sales go down. But what happens if it harms unit cohesion and morale and esprit de corps in our military?
By the summer of 2021, Trump's messaging had reached school board meetings in places like Loudoun County, Virginia, where parents began to protest against CRT.
It's an unlawful arrest. I have a First Amendment right.
Parents have really taken a deep interest in school board elections. This is something that we haven't quite seen before in terms of the number of people being recalled from school boards, the number of people running for school boards, all over critical race theory. A lot of people aren't making the distinction between this is critical race theory and this is just simply teaching about systemic racism. There are people who will say, I've never experienced racism. I'm not really sure if it's as big a deal as others are making it out to be.
So let's talk to the two opposing sides. Jonathan Butcher is the Will Skillman Fellow in Education at the Heritage Foundation. Gary Peeler teaches constitutional law at Georgetown University Law Center. He was an editor of Critical Race Theory, the key writings that formed the movement, one of the first books on the subject.
These are college-level ideas because they're basically the premise that the world is not necessarily simply the way it seems to our senses, that more might be going on. It's a theory of interpretation of how to look at the social world that we live in, practices, etc., institutions, and how to interpret that. What does it mean? Why does it work the way it does?
It is a philosophy that believes that everything in public and private life must be considered with respect to racial identities. One of the core ideas of critical theory is that experience is what mattered, not objective truth. If you see the world through the lens of race, why then everything becomes about racism.
But is this actually being taught in K-12 classrooms?
What is taught in schools is the curriculum, the facts of history. The teachers might be influenced by a particular interpretive theory and might teach that way. And in fact, I would say teachers are inevitably influenced by some theory of history.
Do you need to experience racism to believe that CRT is a real legal framework and only studied in law school, but that children should have a basic understanding of systemic racism? It's coming down to in terms of just these different interpretations of the same thing. Like, we're all speaking the same language, but what we hear is just vastly different.